The 5059 gigabyte is apparently real. So, and you didn't need me to tell you that. I think there's enough information out there that it seemed like it was a real thing, but I can directly confirm myself now. Yeah, it's real. There will be a 5059 gigabyte. Now, the number one thing that everybody is wondering is why, right? And so I reached out to a few sources. 3 got back to me. One of them is a retail contact that says, yes, it is coming, and they have no idea why, and Nvidia gave them no explanation. I asked someone at Nvidia, why is this happening? Now, of course, this person isn't Jensen Wang, and even Jensen Wang probably doesn't care about the 5050, to be honest. He's more worried about AI. But so just because I know someone at Nvidia doesn't mean they know everything going on at that massive company. And the answer the person gave was they have no idea, and they didn't speculate on as to why that's coming either. And then another source I have just sent me like a laughing emoji. So nobody I reached out to is exactly sure why it's happening. And I think that tells you some stuff. It's just this is happening. This is probably a last minute product launch, but I do think I know what's probably going on here. I thought about it. I looked at the specs, and let me pull this up here. Let me share my screen. Yes, let me share this. All right. So here's what it comes down to, I believe. I believe what is going on with the 5059 gigabyte is if you look at the bandwidth, all right, let me see here. Yeah, if you look at the bandwidth on there, it is 320 gigabytes per second for the existing 5050. And I think a lot of people forget this. The existing desktop 5050 uses GDDR6. So think about it. Okay, if they're going to use GDDR7, well, if they gave it 12 gigabytes over a 128-bit bus, that's massively faster RAM. There's probably going to be a lot of scenarios where it beats the 5060. But if they give it a 96-bit bus, it has like 5% more bandwidth than the 5050 8 gigabyte. And I genuinely think that's what this is just trying to make the performance line up with the 8 gigabyte model. If they use 3 gigabit modules, I believe, people can correct me in the chat, I believe the slowest that's being manufactured for that is 28 gigabit. In fact, there will be much faster. So I think they know this will perform a little better already than the 8 gigabyte, and they don't want it to beat the 5060 in a lot of situations where you need more than 8 gigabytes, and also it just has the same bandwidth or more, maybe, if they use faster module throughs for the 3 gigabyte chips than the 5060. So I believe that's why they're doing that. Now, that doesn't entirely explain it, though, does it? Right? Like, you would say, okay, Tom, so they're doing that so the bandwidth matches. That explains that part of it. But also, why are they launching it's not even about the 9 gigabytes. Why are they launching a GDDR7 variant of the 5050? And here's the two answers I can give. Either, and it could be both of these, either it's part of a larger refresh coming, right? Where there will be a 48 gigabyte, like 5090 Ti, maybe 18 gigabyte 5070, 12 gigabyte 5060. The 3 gigabyte module refresh that we've all been hearing might be coming eventually, the super refresh. And they're in tandem also launching a 9 gigabyte to keep up with 9, 12, and make the stack make sense. Now, again, you would go, but why bother? And there's a chance that when Nvidia does this, if they do this big refresh of GDDR7 capacity for the 50 series early next year. Again, I'm not confirming they're definitely going to do that, but I do suspect they're going to do that to extend the generation if they decide they don't want to launch the 6090 at the end of next year. Again, I just think about it that could be what this suggests a little bit too, that they are going to do a mid-gen refresh because of how late the next series will be. Like, in that situation, there's a chance they're going to buy up 3 gigabyte GDDR7 modules in massive bulk purchases. And remember, it's not launching today during RAM shortages. Like, there's a chance they think they might be able to get enough next year, though. I have heard Nvidia expects supply to get better at the end of this year. In that scenario, there's a chance Nvidia might bulk buy a massive amount of GDDR7, and they need some release valve for the 5050 series to use GDDR7 if there's a month where they're out of GDDR6, or again, maybe they're just switching from GDDR6. That would be why this is happening. So just to recap what's going on with the 5050, yes, there is a 5059 gigabyte probably coming, according to the people I talked to, No, Nvidia hasn't offered any explanation to their partners, but if you really read into it here, right? If you really look at what's going on, the answer is 96-bit GDDR7 will have similar bandwidth to 128-bit GDDR6, which is what the current desktop model uses. Then the question, well, why use GDDR7 at all? There's a chance there's a larger refresh coming, / they need to use GDDR7 sometimes as they start moving to using GDDR6 less and less and less and less moving forward. Any big GDDR7 contract, they'll probably want some version of the 5050 that no longer uses GDDR6. And I guess they've decided on 9 gigabytes. Now, finally, could they have given it 12 gigabytes? Could they have had a 5060 12 gigabyte? And then also a 5050? Who knows? They could probably just call it the 5050 Ti 12 gigabyte because, I mean, it will have like 40% more bandwidth. It'll probably perform 15-20% better. Yes, they could have, but they're so stingy and greedy. I don't know what to tell you. Who knows? There could still be a 5050 Ti 12 gigabyte, but I would suggest this is just NVIDIA being extra greedy here and needlessly, cutting down this product to match 5050 GDDR6 performance and not mess with the, how their lineup is organized. I actually think I'll probably have some more NVIDIA leaks coming soon about what they plan to do with this and next generation. So make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, by the way, so you don't miss that. But that would probably come next week or so. What I'm telling you today about NVIDIA is about the 5059 gigabyte. All right, now let us move on to another exciting thing here. Let me share my screen once again. All right, there we go. Let me do that too, just to get rid of that. Well, let me actually do this. There it goes. That looks a little more professional, doesn't it? There. So yeah, let's move on to Project Helix. This is actually seemingly not that big of an announcement, really, if you follow this channel. I mean, let's be entirely honest here. I've been leaking stuff about Xbox Magnus, which is the name of the APU. And I think Helix is kind of a cool name. Maybe they will just call it Xbox Helix. I don't think that's the dumbest name actually ever. But so if you're someone who's been following this channel closely and watched all of the exclusive leaks, out of this channel, like my big Xbox Magnus leak that goes through everything. I'll go through it again a little bit here today. This isn't new. Like obviously Xbox, was working on some hybrid console that's stronger than the PS6, at least on paper. And that is likely to be able to play your Xbox games, but then also using the same chiplet in the 9070 XT successor. Again, the exact same chiplet that desktop RDNA 5 will use for their mid-range product in the $500 to $600 range. In doing so, that would tell you, I mean, yeah, this is probably a hybrid console as well, and it looks pretty powerful. But here's the thing. When Asha comes out, and this is where we'll get to my analysis of her announcement, and says it will lead in performance and play your Xbox and PC games, I mean, that just directly confirms a couple of things, in my opinion. This tells you that Xbox is confident they will outperform the PS6 next gen. And this is more confidence than they showed with the Series X, where they said we have the most powerful kind of, or like they would usually use mealy mouth speak a little bit, like, but here they're just directly saying we think this will be stronger. Now, to be fair, they were wrong last gen. Xbox Series X was not stronger than the PS5 if your definition of that is outperforming it in most games on average. It usually performs slightly better than the PS5 in like 30% of games, lose in like 40% and 20%. They perform basically the same. You can find Xbox games where it outperformed the PS5, but more often than not, the PS5 would slightly outperform it or they'd perform the same. So to be clear, maybe they're wrong, but I don't think they are. I think Sony's going for a more PS4-like approach next gen, and Xbox is, well, they're building a bridge out of the console market, and so they'll probably charge $1,000 or more for this thing. Although I will say this about the price. I was thinking about this today. I have a document that directly says AMD wants their successor to the 9070 XT, that uses the RDNA 5 AT2 die. AMD has directly said in a document they're targeting $550. Now, who knows what that really means, where prices will be. Maybe that'll end up being $650 next year or whatever. But if the graphics card itself, which uses the same chiplet Magnus uses and uses the same type of RAM, is like, let's say it's $600. Let's split the difference between where I think we'll be. Let's say it's $600. Okay, well then what? You need to add more RAM for the Xbox. All right. Well, what would that really be? Like another $200 there. Then the CPU die for Xbox Magnus is more expensive than obviously the output die that would be in the graphics card. But even then, it's not that big of a die, even though it's 3 nanometer. Another $100. I mean, if Microsoft wanted to sell this thing at cost, they could probably do so at around $900 if it was mass manufactured at a large scale. So I will say that. So anyone who thinks it'll be 2000, I don't think the bomb cost suggests that. However, I do expect them to make at least a small profit on it. And so my estimate would be that if Xbox wanted to be kind of aggressive, they would go for $999, and that will look like a lot, to most people, but it just will depend on who you are. Because right now they're already selling the Xbox Series X 2 TB for 800. I mean, they'll say, "Hey, that was 800," even though it stopped selling effectively at that price. So it's not really a good point. But they'll say this is $200 more, and this is, I mean, I don't know what would it be in performance compared to it. It's going to be just wildly faster. So I will say that I think expect at least 1,000. If they wanted to be crazy aggressive, I could see 900, and most likely I could see 1,200, but I don't think more than 1,500. And they would just have to try to convince you. And again, I'm not saying I'm going to get one, right? I'm just explaining what they'll try to do. You don't have to agree with this. I'm just explaining it. They would just say, we have something that's faster than the PlayStation 6, and you know, it costs twice as much or 50% more, whatever it ends up being, than the PS6. But they'll say you're getting something that's like a bigger performance lead than we've ever had, whether it's true or not, and it can play all of your PC games. And it'll be up to them to make it feel like that's worth it. Hopefully that's what they do. At least they don't just talk about Copilot the whole time. Let me say that I do have a new die shrink coming out. Die Shrink 172, where I have a guest on and we just go into the latest machinations and changes at Team Xbox and what it probably means for the future of Xbox with their new head of Xbox, Asha Sharma. Can't recommend this enough. Join the Patreon to get access to that, by the way. But going back to Xbox Magnus here, she confirmed that they think that it will win performance, number one. And number two, she confirmed that it's a hybrid design. This directly confirms my leak, basically, right here. Like, this is yet another thing. My leak. What did my leak say? That it would use RDNA 5 and launch in 2027. That'd be a hybrid console. Lisa Su confirmed it is RDNA 5. It is coming in 2027. Now, Asha Sharma confirmed the hybrid console design. Anyone doubting if this leak on screen here is fake, I think you got to put it to bed. It's now verified as true. I have many key details. And so I think it would be worth showing you all what this is really quick again, because I'm sure there's many people seeing the announcement of Project Helix and they're like, well, what does this mean? Maybe you missed this leak. So first of all, I'd recommend watching that video itself. It helps the channel and whatever. But just to remind everybody, this is the biggest console APU in history. Not necessarily the most silicon, because some prior consoles had graphics cards and CPUs combined, whatever. But this is the biggest APU, at least in console history. It's 408 millimeters squared of all 3 nanometer silicon. Now, it might use two different variants of the 3 nanometer node, right? But it is all 3 nanometer. And so this is a beast for the console world. 68 CUs of RDNA 5. If I remember correctly, the Xbox Series X has 52 compute units or something like that enabled. And this is not before cut down. This is after. The full die 70 cut down to 68, and kind of an odd shader engine array, but I mean layout. But that's for nerds. We're not going to get into that. The point of this being RDNA 4, I mean, God, what, like RDNA 3 per CU, each compute unit. RDNA 3 is like, I don't know, 7 to 10% faster. Let's say 5 to 10% faster than RDNA 2. More than that in ray tracing, but in raster, it's that much more. And then RDNA 4 is like 40% faster than RDNA 3 in rasterization performance. So if we add this up, let's just call it 1.07 times 1.4. And then, of course, I've already leaked pictures actually from a document showing that RDNA 5 should be 10% faster than RDNA 4 per compute unit. You're looking at 65% more performance per compute unit between both Xbox Magnus and the PlayStation 6 per compute unit compared to the previous gen. So I do think that's worth pointing out. Like you see, like, oh, they're only increasing the amount of compute units by 30%. Right, but each one of them is 65% faster in raster. And in ray tracing, it's like 10, 12 times faster per compute unit. Or what is it? Is it 10, 12? Or like it's, yeah, I'd have to go back and double check if it was that or after the amount of compute units. But no, it's more like, that'd be more like 2, 4, more like 5 times faster in ray tracing per compute unit, I think, or something. Don't quote me on that, but it's like wildly faster. So if we compare this, 65% faster per compute unit, that's actually at same clocks. I think we can also assume that Xbox Magnus will at least run at 2.5 gigahertz versus the, what is it before, like 1.8 something, I believe, or like so if you think about that, and this is all just scratch math I'm doing on the side here, and then multiply that by, again, now 68 divided by 52. Again, this is scratch math, but Xbox Magnus is going to be at least 5 times faster than the Series X. At least I'd say probably 5 to 6 times faster, and that's in raster. And ray tracing, I mean, God, it might be 20, 30 times faster. So this is going to be pretty powerful, and it's also very cool. Let me say here too in the specs, I thought it was cool, at least when I saw this, that it's not just Zen 6C cores. Now, I don't think Sony needs more than Zen 6C, and I'll get to the PS6 specs again soon. I don't think they need more than Zen 6C and the PS6 because it's just going to be running on 120 hertz display, TVs anyways. But the fact that Xbox Magnus will run PC games means it does actually probably need one of the latest, most powerful CPUs. Because there's going to be a lot of people that want to use this thing here to game at 240 hertz. So giving 3 Zen 6 cores for the primary threads in a game, and then enough backup cores to like carry the threads next gen games will need. This thing could be very powerful. I think that the top clocking cores in Magnus are going to be at least at 5 gigahertz and likely at least at 6 gigahertz. Though I will say this: do not expect them to be 7 gigahertz, because remember, they're not using 2 nanometer. They're not using N2X, which is what the 7 gigahertz targeted maximum desktop Zen 6 product is going to use. They're not even using N2P. They're using N3P. So, that's a pretty massive reduction in peak clock potential there. But it is still a better node. It is still a better node than the existing 4 nanometer. And so I would think it's probably going to be 5.5 to 6 gigahertz here. Maybe more. Who knows? Maybe they pull a rabbit out of a hat, 6.5, but that's still awesome. That's still quite good for a console, I would say. And then, of course, also it has up to 48 gigabytes of RAM. I think they will select either 36 gigabytes or 48 gigabytes. 36 could work. You could have like, especially if they actually have an optimized SteamOS like version of Windows 12 that this will run or something. In that scenario, I could see it being like 36 gigabytes is like 12 to 16 gigabytes for the VRAM side, and then 20 to 24 of system. That sounds like that's enough RAM to me. And then there should be less bloat in the gaming mode than you would get in normal Windows. So it might almost effectively be like if you had a 40 gigabyte PC. That's probably about perfect if they wanted to save some money. But I could see them going all the way up to 48 gigabytes if they really wanted to market this as a power PC for cheap, which again is how you think about this: a power PC for cheap. This will be not just competing with the PS6. This will be competing with those stupid $2,500 Asus pre-builts that only have a 4070. And that light, if it's even $1,200, you're spending like half what Asus would charge you for something weaker. That's what would make this thing very cool. I don't think they charge more than 15 again. Also, there's an NPU with up to 110 tops in 6-watt mode, or 46 tops in 1.2-watt mode, according to the documents I have. And yeah, I mean, look, I think there's no way around it. That mic is going to be used for an AI assistant, and I'm really concerned about that. Again, if you want to hear my concerns with a guest where we talk for over an hour, subscribe to Moore's Law Z on Patreon, and you'll get access to this tomorrow. All right, so that is Xbox Magnus, and I believe that is about all I have to say about it, besides just to put things in perspective. What will the performance be? I think around RTX 5080 in raster and around 5090 Ti in ray trace. Not Ti. Well, maybe. I don't know how strong the Ti will be, but possibly up to the 5090 in ray tracing or something. I really do. And I'm sorry. I have to, anyone who says I'm insane, I'm overhyping this. Guys, the 9070 XT has 64 compute units It's only like 15 to 20% behind a 5080. Wake up. This is more compute units than a 9070 XT and will have 10% more performance per CU. That puts it right around 5080 performance, maybe even 5080 Super. And then in ray tracing, I don't know where the 9070 XT is in every game, but the 9070 XT is, around what, a 5070 in ray tracing, sometimes better. It depends. But if you think about it, then RDNA 5 like doubles ray tracing performance, I believe, per CU compared to RDNA 4. So what's double? Like a 5070s ray tracing. You're getting up there, or even more actually. RDNA 5 is the big push where AMD tries to beat Nvidia in ray tracing. And so if you think about it, you're already at a situation where you have 5080 raster, but then we're doubling that in terms of ray tracing performance. Probably that gets you at least in the ballpark of the 5090 of or if it's well optimized. And so I think that's very exciting. Again, anyone who argues with me about the ray tracing stuff like they did with my PS5 leak, guys, what do you want me to say? The numbers don't lie. More CUs than than the 9070 XT. They're doubling ray trace. I don't just have like a document saying this is a target. I have benchmarks of simulated RDNA 5 benchmarks that show the ray tracing is that much better than RDNA 4. So unless something completely falls apart, which I don't think it will, because AMD has to have RDNA 5 delivered because of how many products will use it with their customers. That's where it's going to be. It's going to be a very cost-effective device if you think of it as a PC. Now, if you're a PlayStation fanboy who refuses to game on PC, you'll probably clown on this a lot when they announce it's $1,000 to $1,500. But again, then this really isn't for you. And shut up. Like that's what it is. This is Xbox moving away from console and giving their fans a consolation prize. And I do hope they do a good job with that. I think everyone should for competition's sake, right? I mean, come on, everybody. All right, so that is Xbox Project Helix. Now, I have a couple PS6 segments I want to get to. But first, let me just very briefly remind everybody what we're dealing with here with the PS6. And by the way, there's almost 1,000 people watching. Like the video. Let's get to 1,000 likes. What are we doing? What are we doing, everybody? Come on. Show support. Show support. But anyways, yes, here's the PlayStation 6 like thumbnail. Again, this is one of the videos I put the most effort into. I literally have renders of I know the die size exactly of it, and so I did renders of it to try to convey the product. I had to pay someone to do that, by the way. This was a lot of work. So if you haven't seen this video, please check it out. But as you can see, this is not the same thing as Xbox Magnus. It will probably be in the same ballpark-ish in experience, which is all Sony's going to try to do to compete at a lower price. But, it tells you a lot, right? 280 millimeter squared. It's actually, I believe, exactly the same die size of the existing 6 nanometer PS5, isn't it? So there's clearly something interesting going on where they want this die size. I almost wonder if there's going to be a reuse of some stuff they did before. I don't know, but I think that can't be a coincidence. But look, 280 millimeters squared, not 408 millimeters squared. So again, now this is where I talk to the Xbox fanboys. If you clown on PlayStation, this is going to cost a lot more though. So there's a reason the PlayStation's weaker. Okay. 54 compute units is last I saw. Who knows if I will say the document that showed the compute unit. Oh no, wait, I think that was up to date because the source did get me the latest when I put that leak out. So I believe that's probably still correct. But then, this is not meant to run 240 hertz. It's got 8 Zen 6C cores. If I were to guess what these will be clocked at, it'd be between 4 and 5 gigahertz, and then 2 Zen 6 low power cores for the operating system and blah, blah, blah. So the current PS5 actually does pull some CPU performance away from its 8 Zen 2 cores to run the operating system. And in one document, it said adding 2 1 watt low power cores boosted CPU performance by 20%. Now, see, that's interesting to me because so far I have not seen that Magnus has low power cores. So you have to wonder, though. Yes, it's cool they're giving you Zen 6, 3 nanometer Zen 6, but still Zen 6, and perhaps that will hit at least 5.5, probably 6 gigahertz. But if this were to be 5 gigahertz, but a 20% boost from that, I don't know. You could see games where there might not be that big of a difference, but I don't know. I think the Xbox's main cores will probably be clocked so much faster that, it'll be a little weaker. But here's the thing. I mean, especially just having tried out Resident Evil 9 on the PlayStation 5 Pro, which, by the way, phenomenal game, no matter what platform you're on. Even Switch 2 apparently runs it well. Get Resident Evil 9. I think it might be the best Resident Evil. Um, it's a perfect marriage of the best parts of like Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8 and 4. They pulled it off. It's just amazing. Um, but anyways, the point here being, I'm playing Resident Evil 9. I actually played in the ray tracing mode at 60 frames, and I think it's great. It looks beautiful. But there's a 120 hertz mode that generally speaking is around 100, but sometimes drops to 90. Look, guys, this here, what you're looking at, 10 Zen 6 versus 8 Zen 2. I mean, let me do the math on that. What is that? Zen 3 was like what, 30% faster at gaming. Zen 4 was pretty much another 30% faster at gaming than Zen 3 because of how highly it was clocked. And then Zen 5, not a whole lot. I'll give it barely nothing. But Zen 6 should have, yeah, you're looking at gaming performance per core at the same clocks, like doubling of performance. And then this will probably also be clocked like 10, 20, 30% faster than the cores in the PS6. So you're looking at something that's probably going to be 3 to 4 times more CPU performance. And already Zen 2 can still almost do 120 hertz right now. It's more like a 60 to 90 hertz, but some games can pull it off. Sony is building this console for TVs, and they will be 120 hertz as the standard for a very long time. And many people don't even have above 60. So is Xbox Magnus's CPU stronger? Yes, it definitely is in the PS6. But I don't think it is in an appreciable way that really matters for their targets, because this is targeting 4K 120 TVs. And this will be enough to saturate that to hit that frame rate. So that's that. Now, if we go to like the full specs here and compare the graphics, I have a thing here that showed they were targeting, and I think they will probably get close to 3 gigahertz. So that gets you close to like 40 teraflops or something. That's 4 times the teraflops of the PS5. I mean, come on, guys. This thing's at least 3 times. I mean, this is going to crush raster. I mean, again, go look at how RE9 looks, and then remember that it will be on PS6 like 3 times the raster and up to maybe even 12 times the ray tracing. I mean, and again, I think its ray tracing will probably be fairly close to Xbox Magnus, depending on clocks. So that's why I say the ballpark of 5090. Who knows? Maybe Xbox Magnus is faster than the 5090 in ray tracing, and this is around the same as it. But these are all just estimates here. And I think that's enough. I think when you look at what they accomplished with a 4K 60 ray traced RE9 on a PS5 Pro, this will be probably 3 to 6 times faster ray tracing than the PS5 Pro. Probably around double the raster. A PSSR 3 will be available. I think they will fully saturate 4K 120 ray tracing. But again, this will be used on TVs. Xbox will be used on other things. So Xbox needs that extra performance to justify itself as a hybrid PC device, I believe. Or at least that's what Microsoft thinks, and I agree with them. And so, yeah, that's this. I mean, I don't have that much else. And I will say this too. Depending on how much like AI is used for like smarter NPCs or generating content while you're playing a game, I do think this is worth pointing out. Guys, the PS6 might be like 500 times faster than the PS5 and that type of thing. So when people look at so many people, when I put out the PlayStation 6 leaks, hyperventilated over raster, and guys, you're fighting the last war. This is like if people were arguing on the PS5 about teraflops, when teraflops was the last war with the PS4. What it was with the PS5 is like a 1,000 times faster, 100 times faster storage, IO controllers that help, like just a more modern architecture. The PS4 couldn't even do ray tracing in the first place. That was the real differentiator there. Yes, it had a lot more teraflops, but really like PS4, Xbox One, and Xbox One X to Xbox Series X and PS5, if you were arguing about teraflops, you were out to lunch. And that turned out to be correct, because the PS5 and Series X performed about the same, despite there being a big teraflops difference. That was the last war. The current gen war with PS5 and Series X was about how fast is your storage and how optimized is your architecture to run modern games. That's the current war. The next war will be ray tracing and AI performance. And they will have better raster, a lot better raster than the current PS5 Pro. But it's enough to get to 4K 120 and then just crank ray tracing up, AI up. So I just think it's so stupid, in my opinion, when I keep seeing like people talk about raster. it just reminds me of people who keep forgetting, like, that's the current war, not the next gen war. You want to talk about the real difference between next gen consoles? Let's talk about the fact that Xbox Magnus, especially if it uses GPU and NPU, it's like 1,000 times faster than the Series X at doing AI stuff, or at least hundreds of times, I think. Let's talk about the fact that in ray tracing, it will beat the Series X by probably, I mean, what, like 10 to 20 times? That's like a PS3 to PS4 upgrade right there in the specs that matter. Don't fight the last war. So I want to say that. Speaking of last wars, though, they're bringing back handhelds. I'm not going to dwell on this much because I don't think it's worth discussing. Like, we've already seen with the modest specs of the Switch 2 that it can outperform the Series S. The point is, this is going to be comfortably like 3, 4, 5 times faster than the Switch 2 or something. And that runs Resident Evil 2 pretty well on its little screen. This is meant to just not hold back the PS6 and scale the game down. It actually has a pretty big memory bus for a handheld device. This is like kind of getting into like Strix Halo territory, closer to that than not. And then just enough CUs to fully saturate 1080p, I believe. And I think, when you look at the fact that this will be able to be docked, the PS6 handheld, um, where the difference in clocks, at least what I saw, I'm trying to remember what it was. This might have been one of the outdated ones, or oh no, 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 that's right. I think it was something like 1.2 gigahertz handheld, like 1.6 gigahertz in docked mode. That's only like a 30% difference. If I had to guess what's going on with the PS6 handheld, is it will have a OLED like 1080p 120 display, and it will just plan to run all of your games in 1080p with probably a PSSR 3 on ultra high quality mode. And then the second you plug it into your TV, it gets a 30% boost in performance, because it'll be docked, right? And have power provided to it, assumably. And in that mode, what it will probably just do is still like do 1080p, but it'll just use like performance mode PSSR 3 to saturate a 4K screen and probably look better than the base PS5, actually quite a bit better, because it should have the raster is lower, but it will have access to PSSR 3, and the PS5 doesn't have that. So it will probably even out to similar real world raster performance, if that makes sense. It's such an imperfect term, but then also vastly better ray tracing, and I just think it will look better than PS5 as well. So it's very exciting. And no, I don't think it will hold back the PS6 at all. I think I think any, when you look at the difference in CPU, they have the same for background tasks, 2 LP cores. Yes, half the Zen 6C cores, but I believe that they think most of the time that won't matter because you'll probably be playing most games actually at like 60 hertz more often than not. Does that make sense? Like, and they have the extra cores and performance on the base on the PS6 home console, because they know that anyone who buys that console, who's going to spend 600 to 800 bucks or whatever it is, they're going to want to be able to play in 120 hertz easily. And this one, they'll just use that extra CPU performance for other stuff. But anyways, when I talk to developers, they don't seem to be worried about this. And if anyone's wondering if, do we have any evidence that the PS6 handheld is definitely coming? We do. If you missed this leak here in Broken Silicon 340, there's timestamps. You can go straight to it. If you go to that, here it is. I had developers talking about the new updates to the SDKs for PlayStation that showed that they now want you to program games to be able to run on only 8 threads. Huh? Run games only on 8 threads? What has 8 threads? Oh, 4 Zen 6C cores. So they are prepping the low power mode as a fallback in case the game doesn't get patched to work on the handheld. And that confirms the specs that I've leaked for it as well. So there you go. That's how everything's shake up. The way I would summarize the next gen consoles is Xbox Magnus is trying to give you pretty much what like a 5080 Super would give you now in a $1,000 to $1,500 PC. So like instead of a $3,000, $2,000 PC, you're getting it at a discount. But then it also has the benefit of having backwards compatibility to Xbox Series X and Xbox One. And I guess also the original Xbox, because they were nice enough to patch to work on getting older games to work on that, whereas Sony still has not for some reason. Actually, I think I can explain why later if you want. But yeah, so that's Xbox Magnus, and then PS6 will deliver probably the same experience as Xbox Magnus, but with none of the extra oomph to be a PC, because it's not a PC. Xbox Magnus will deliver like high-end PC gaming with the ability to use higher frame rates, whereas PlayStation 6 will give you pretty much high-end PC gaming, but for a 4K 120 display, so not the extra PC features of, gaming at higher frame rates. That's what and then the handheld will give you pretty much the same experience as the PS6 home console, but at a lower resolution, and it's portable. So that's what you're getting. That's the next gen consoles, and I think they sound way more interesting, by the way, than the current gen consoles did. I think people are sleeping on how big next gen could be. It looks far more interesting to me. And again, want to plug the new die shrink, join the Moore's Laws at Patreon. You'll get access to it. And then I have one more thing I want to do, which will be talking about um, why I believe the PS6 is still launching in 2027 and certainly not launching in 2029. But before I get to that final thing, how about an ad from a sponsor? This live stream is sponsored by Bullstrap. I actually have their nav wallet right here in ocean color. It's really cool. It has built-in tracking. So it has a built-in tracker in it. It's very high quality and slim, because I hate bulky wallets. I hate them. And so I like it. I approve it. I checked it out. It is very, very, very cool. They have all different types of colors here. Let me get to this too as well. I mean, most phone cases and wallets don't last. I'll just say that as well, especially with me. I'm incredibly rough on wallets. I mean, I remember actually pulling one out in a store, and the cashier asked me if it had gone through a war zone. So the fact that this thing comes off as very sturdy to me, that when I used it, I don't have my cards in it right now because I don't want to dox myself, but it is very high quality. This thing did not fall apart being beaten around in my pocket, and it's looks very and feels very, very premium as well. Also, it's handcrafted with full grain leather that comes with a lifetime warranty and offers free replacements. That's actually enormous, too. They give you free replacements. And it has, like I said, tracking built right in. You don't need to add an air tag. They've already done it. And also note that they have all different types of colors. They have a smaller version, a larger version. They also have bags for women, and they have a ton of different high quality products as well. So, if you want gear that's actually designed to last a lifetime with free replacements, even if it does not last a lifetime, they'll send you a free replacement, and that also feel incredibly high quality and come with built-in tracking. You can grab your own Nav wallet right now, or anything else, I believe, on their website for 15% off by using code MOORE15. That's MOORE 15, MOORE 15. If you click through the link below. And remember, even just clicking on the link below helps the channel a ton. Of course, getting one of their products helps even more. All right. Now let us move on to the final thing I want to get to before I start answering live questions here. So let me put down a timestamp. All right. I'm leaving the PlayStation light on because Bespoke writes in from the Patreon, which remember you can submit free questions to this if you join it at the proper tier, and says, not sure if this one is better suited for this discussion or the other one, but people thinking that Sony would rather raise the price of the PS5, which also needs RAM, by the way, over releasing a substantially more powerful PS6 at a higher price than they previously wanted, are out to lunch. The cost of not releasing far outweigh that $100 extra in RAM cost, if that. PS5 had 5 exclusive launch window games, and the PS6 will too. They can't earn revenue if there's no console to buy. And Bespoke actually submitted other points as well. And I talk about it a lot on the last die shrink. Again, I can't recommend that enough if you join the Patreon to check that one out. But I wanted to say a lot of the stuff I said in that die shrink that will come out tomorrow here as well, because I think I've crystallized why I would say the PS6 will almost certainly come out in 2027, if not probably early 2028. I do not think it will be delayed to 2029. All right, first things first. When people talk about RAM prices, they don't get how much it costs to develop a console. Just the APU. Sony is paying AMD tens of millions of dollars. Tens of millions of dollars. Okay? Paying extra for RAM for like the first 6 months of the console life is not worth delaying something. They have contracts with AMD and TSMC. They have set in stone. Like, if they pulled their allotment of 3 nanometer manufacturing from Quarter two of 2027, which again, I've seen this in documents. Quarter two 2027, that's the contract. That's when they're supposed to start manufacturing PlayStation 6s on TSMC 3 nanometer node. If they were to pull that contract, it's not like TSMC is like, oh, we'll bump it back a month. No, they might like lose all their capacity they bought and then have to go all the way to 2030 or something. This thing was designed years ago. This thing was set in stone years ago, and it cost tens of millions of dollars. It costs them more money to delay it than it does to pay extra for RAM. That's number one. Okay. Number two, and this is something I realized recently that I can't believe I haven't said yet. Guys, GDDR6 prices exploded when the PS5 launched, and they still launched it in 2020. And what you're seeing on screen here is stuff that I don't know if people have the memories of a goldfish, but this is the crap that was slopped around on websites before the PS5 and Series X launched. It wasn't just RAM shortages back then, by the way. There's a pandemic killing millions of people, and they still launched that year. All of this ended up bullshit. Okay. So if Sony would decide to launch this the same year as a pandemic before, why would they not also decide to launch it when there's been RAM shortages like a year before it launches? Because remember, I'm not saying the PlayStation 6 is going to launch today, tomorrow, or in 6 months, or honestly, people, maybe not even 18 months. Late 2027 is closer to 2 years from now than 1. 2 years. They have that long until all of this would really come due, or at least a year and a half, probably, because they'd have to buy some RAM ahead of time. But even if they get less RAM than they wanted, even if it costs extra, guys, they're not going to delay it like 2 years. Now, again, could I see them maybe delaying it to early 2028? I suppose I could. That wouldn't surprise me. They would still keep their contracts with TSMC, start manufacturing it in quarter two of next year, and then just stockpile and stockpile and stockpile as many consoles as they can get, and then wait until they get the perfect RAM deal. And then there'll be like a judgment call. Like, can we assemble these and launch them by November, or should we wait to launch them in like February, in or April or something like tax season? I could see Sony deciding to like delay it half a year, but I just don't think they delay it more than that. The contracts are set in stone. When people talk about how much it costs for RAM, they've dealt with this before. The development cost is more. And the PS5 launched when RAM prices went up 3x. That's what I was told, by the way. Go watch my videos from late 2020. RAM prices skyrocketed 3x. It's very similar to now. And they still launched the PS5. And in fact, Sony did one better. Sony paid for expensive air shipping to get the PS6 out. The PS5 out in volume. And air shipping costs, I think, like quadrupled or more during late 2020. So this is not, I'm sorry, I just feel like it's nonsense when people say stuff like 2029. I don't send me a link to anything from Bloomberg. They said they get like launch dates wrong consistently, by the way. Like the Switch 2 launch date, wrong, this wrong, all this wrong, wrong, wrong. So I just think we need to be very clear about that, because I think sometimes when people talk about delaying things, they just talk about like it might be hard or it would cost more. Yeah, life's not fair. It might cost them more money. It might be a logistical headache, but they've dealt with logistical headaches before, exactly like what's going on right now with RAM shortages and prices going up. The exact same thing happened in 2020, and they did not delay the PS5. And it's because it would have cost them far more to delay it than to just stay the course and eat some cost. So I just want to be very clear about that. Again, could it be delayed to like early 2028? Yeah, I guess. I could see it, but I don't really see a delay to 2029 at all. And one final thing here is from the people I talk to behind the scenes, they do think the RAM thing is going to get significantly better by the end of this year and a lot better by the end of next year. So what you'd see is Sony just go, all right, they'll make the judgment call, not even this year. They'll make the judgment call on when PS6 comes out, probably early next year, like right before they start manufacturing at TSMC. So that still gives them like a full year, 12 months at least, maybe almost 13 months or 14 months to make this decision. And so they have all of that time to wait and see what happens to the market. And then when when it finally comes time to make the judgment call, what they're going to do is they're just going to go, have prices started to come down a little? If the answer is yes, we're going to stay the course, because Well, at the end of the day, this is expensive. But again, people forget this. This isn't more than RAM cost back then. I mean, guys, go look at what DDR5 cost when Zen 4 came out, or gosh, when Alder Lake came out. Everyone was freaking out. Look at what GDDR6 was quite new when the next gen consoles came out last time. GDDR7 will be less new in 2027. We will have had, well, it should have been 2 generations, right? But it will have been 3 years since Blackwell launched, whereas I believe it was 2 years since Turing launched when the PS5 came out. So they had a 2 years of GDDR6 being the newest thing. Here will be 3 years. And also, they're not even using the latest 2 nanometer node. So I don't think people get, like what really goes into planning these things when they make some claims like this. They can't do it. Yeah. So that's what I would say about the PS6 is I think that fully explains why I would just be blown away if they pushed it back to 2029. All right. Now, let me put down a timestamp there, put down another timestamp here, and get to the first tipped question. So R1NG, oh wait, it zoomed around on me there. R1NG Master J5 writes that should the docked Canis be powerful enough to technically run path tracing at like 30 with heavy PSSR for upscaling? Well, I mean, this is what you have to remember. Like, let's say it's going to depend on the game, first of all, right? Because like path tracing runs significantly better on some games than other. So I'm not going to make a promise that every game will go to full 4K or always use path tracing. But what I will say is, let's go back here past the bullstrap ad. Let's just put it this way. The PS6 base will be like 6 to 12 times faster than the PS5 at ray tracing. Okay. All right. Well, right now they can at least run Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition, which requires ray tracing. So whatever the PS5 would be doing at like 10 frames a second right now, it's going to do 60 to 120. Right. But that's at like 1440p to 4K dynamic res, right? Sure. But I mean, this thing here is going to go to like a third-ish to a fourth-ish the performance. Well, what's a fourth of 4K? 1080p. And they'll have PSSR 3 by then. So they'll probably just up-res 720p if they need to. And it'll be able to run, in 1080p, whatever the PS6 home console runs in 4K. And so, yes, there might be games where like the PS6 is 1800p to get more ray, to be able to crank out more ray tracing or turn that up more or something. I don't know. But whatever, if that's 1800p, the PS6 handheld will upscale from 900p. And look at what a Resident Evil looks like. I believe it upscales from 1080 something, right? Or like somewhere around there. And it looks ultra sharp with PSSR too. So yeah, I think the point really is Canis powerful enough to do blah, blah, blah. It's going to run the same games as PS6. It's just like, fourth the performance. So whatever the PS6 is doing, cut the resolution down by a fourth. It's a little different though than the Series X and the Xbox, the Series X and the Series S. And here's why though. I believe it was like a generation too soon to have the Series S be that much weaker than the Series X because, well, if we're being honest, the Series X is more of like a 1440p console, right? So what's a fourth of that? Well, it's 720p, but a fourth of 4K is 1080p. I think it's just a little bit more sharper. And also the Series X can't run FSR4 or PSSR. It was also the generation before they really got that working at AMD. So a world where you're going from 4K to 1080p with PSSR 3 versus like 1800p to 900p in the weaker console, and you don't have access to the latest upscaling tech. That's a very different world in image quality. And so I think plenty of people will be fine with the image quality of the is that Canis? Yeah, of the handheld APU devices. And I say devices because it wouldn't surprise me if there were there's a PS6S that was basically just the handheld, but a brick a little hockey puck you plug into your TV, because that would be cheaper to manufacture probably than the PS5. And they could say, well, here's our, again, whatever it is, $650 PS6 or $500 PS6 handheld. But then if you don't want it to be a handheld, here's your like $399 upgrade from a PS4. I believe that would be pretty smart for them to do that, to finally get the PS4 people to upgrade. So I suspect something like that might happen, but I don't have proof of the PS6s yet, to be clear. Let me keep scrolling. With the new leadership at Xbox, this comes from Zach Miklos 32. Could you see them set the price of Helix at $1,000 and make a big first impression and aggressive price point? I could see $999. I could. Let me write this down for a timestamp as well. You know, when this live stream is over, Zach, I'd recommend you watch the beginning part where I go over what I think Magnus, or I guess maybe now we'll start calling it Helix, could cost. But if you think about it, it literally uses the same 3 nanometer GPU chiplet that the mid-range RDNA 5 graphics card will use. And I literally know that there's a document that says that that thing was targeting $550. So if we take AMD at their word, which I don't know if it's going to be $550 anymore if their prices are going, but we'll see. But let's say it is $550 for this dedicated RDNA 5 graphics card that's like 20% faster than the 9070 XT. All right, well, remember that graphics card will have to come with a PCB and a cooler and fans. So that's a large chunk of the whole console cost right there anyways. Then you just add a stronger CPU chiplet, or a CPU chiplet at all, as the graphics card will just have an output chiplet instead of a CPU one. All right, add $100 for that, maybe $650. All right, and then I'll have more RAM. Okay, well then maybe add $200 for that or something. All right, what are we at now? Oh, we're at about $850. Oh, well then, I mean, yeah, I think they could get to a bomb cost of maybe $900, where they have $100 of fat on it, because they will want to profit off of this for sure. And in that world, I think they could hit $999. I still kind of suspect they'll do 1,200 and at most 1,500, but I think $999 would send a message. They'd be like, whatever they end up being, I don't know. We're like 20-30% faster, maybe 40%, who knows, than the PS6. And we cost that much more, but it gets you all these features Sony doesn't get. You're just paying more for more, but then you're paying more for more performance. And then also we have this other stuff. A lot of people will still just get the PlayStation. Most people will, I think. But for people that want to go to PC gaming and had an Xbox, I think that'll be a compelling argument at $1,000, and probably still even at 1,200. Once they get to 1,500, I do think that's when people will start to riot at Microsoft. And I would recommend that even if they have to profit on it for this console to make sense, they don't go completely out to lunch on what they charge. Make sure I'm not missing anything else here. All right. FreeKill123100 writes, and it says, for the Xbox Helix, do you think it would be usable for a VR? Yeah, I mean, if you can do VR on a PS5, you can certainly do it way better on Helix. As the Resident Evil VR enjoyer, 32 to 48 gigabytes of RAM would be amazing for VR. Assuming Xbox makes a headset, or would it work with someone else? I don't know, but I'm going to lean towards saying they would just let you use third-party headsets, right? I mean, they already kind of are moving in that direction this gen, right? Yeah, I don't think I don't know, maybe they'll make their own VR headset, but I would suspect they would just let you use, what is it, the Steam Frame or something else. All right, so that's those tipped questions so far. Again, keep those coming in. I'll be doing this for at least another 30 minutes. But let me get to some more questions here from the patrons. So, Amiable Chief writes in and says, regarding Sony's recent announcement on canceling their PC ports for their first-party titles. Well, first of all, please, people, could you put in the chat, is this an official announcement from Sony? Isn't this just a rumor from Jason Schreier that they're going to move away from PC ports to having more exclusives? Like, please let me know in the chat or in the Moore's Laws Discord in the after video thread, because I don't believe this is officially an announcement. But I will say Jason Schreier has a really good track record, so I don't doubt that this is true. It's just, no, Sony hasn't announced this. But anyways, let me continue the question here. I think a happy compromise would be for them to provide an official emulator bundle for PC and restrict their first-party multiplayer titles to console exclusives. Nah, they're not going to do that. Like those live service titles they so love to experiment with and just can't seem to land straight. Yeah, except for Helldivers 2, which, if you think about it, was good because it came from a studio adept at making that sort of thing already, instead of trying to force Bluepoint, to make something that makes no sense. But I'm not going to continue ranting about that. I already ranted quite a bit about the decision to kill Bluepoint. But no, I don't think so. And I do want to say this too. I was just recently on, I don't know if this episode is out yet, actually, but Sacred Symbols recently had me on. Colin Moriarty did. And a point I made there that I want to make again here, actually, is that when you look at start reading the tea leaves, like, there's multiple reasons you might say Sony is going to move more towards having exclusives than having things they publish on other platforms. You might say, oh, well, it turns out they didn't make as much money on Steam as they thought it would. Sure. And it's not worth the effort. Like, these games Sony gets a bigger cut of these games when they're on PlayStation anyways. And so if you only sell 1 million titles, okay, if you sell 500,000 on PlayStation, you're still basically like breaking even with if they were, you're giving up some sales, but not enough to justify that 30% cut that Valve is taking from Sony's games. So you might say that's a reason they're doing it. And undoubtedly that would be a reason if they start making less games that are on all platforms. Sure. But there's another thing you might read into here, which is that next generation, Sony needs this thing to hit because they know they need to win over their PS4 gamers. And the way you do that is pricing things fairly aggressively and going back to your old bread and butter system of tons of exclusives. And also, another thing you might read into, so Xbox Magnus will be stronger than the PS6. The 6090 will be a lot stronger than the PS6. Okay. But, most gamers still don't have that strong of a ray tracing GPU. And if you want your game to be really successful on PC, people have got to be able to play your game. And again, I think there's going to be a shock here. Like, RDNA 4 is substantially better than RDNA 3 at ray tracing. And RDNA 5 is going to do it again, like double it again, I believe, or more. That's going to be a situation where if a game is built for the PS6 first, and it uses ray tracing heavily, you basically need an RTX 5080 or higher, right, to run that game equivalent or even worse, actually, probably, than the PS6 runs it. In such a world, what is your addressable market on PC for the first few years of the console's life? If the games heavily use ray tracing and are optimized to leverage it as powerfully as they can with the PS6 because of how good it and Magnus as well will be at ray tracing. It's not a very big market. It might take years for things to catch up, right? This might be a bigger issue than the SSD problem, where they're like, well, you really need an SSD to play any of these PlayStation games pretty much. Like, this could be worse than that. So I think that's another thing I want to throw out there into the zeitgeist. Like, when Sony's moving away from publishing on other platforms, it might be because of like economics. It might be to make their brand feel more special again. And undoubtedly that would have to be true, those things as well. But you might also see that and go, hey, no one besides people who have RDNA 4 and Blackwell and some of Lovelace, but not most of the Lovelace lineup actually, have a GPU powerful enough to run our game even half as well as the PS6, because it just turns up the ray tracing dial so much. You'll basically need a modern GPU. So you could see them almost taking a step away from a lot of third-party publishing or publishing on third-party platforms simply because it won't make sense. No one can buy the game yet and run it well. I'd throw that out there. Close this here since I'm answering questions. Question generated by Jensen GPT says, I asked this on a previous Broken Silicon or Loose Ends, but we've since had a year of new info and context, so I'll ask again. What truly is the point of Sony continuing development of PSSR after the PS5 Pro? I understand PS5 Pro using it since it has completely different machine learning hardware compared to RDNA 4, but that Project Amethyst presentation by Mark Cerny and Jack Hune did a few months ago implies Sony and AMD are designing graphics chips, pipelines, and software together. So why not just have PS6 use FSR Redstone as is, or the names that even matter, and they'll just call it a PSSR 3 for branding and marketing. So, all right, let me put down a new timestamp for this one here. PSSR 3 make sense. Okay, so the fundamental reasons, and I've done this rant many times, but in my opinion, the fundamental reasons why Sony is doing PSSR, which is a separate fork of FSR, and whenever I talk to people in game development or connected to Sony, they're like, They get annoyed when you say it's FSR. It's not. It is not the same thing. They are not just copying AMD. AMD actually took a lot of things that Sony learned to make FSR better. They are truly learning from each other. One is not just copying the other. That's bullshit. All right. Well, why would you do that? Have this parallel developed upscaling? Well, look, what FSR1 launched in 2021, and it was seen as like maybe as good as current DLSS at the time. But remember, DLSS sucked when it launched. Like DLSS was actually just worse than using like a random resolution slider. So it wasn't a very big deal that FSR1 beat DLSS. It was better than having nothing, but that's all FSR1 was. And DLSS2, once that came out, destroyed FSR1. And then I remember, what's it? The game was Deathloop. When Deathloop came out with FSR2, it actually, a lot of people said, was as good as DLSS 2. But then very quickly, and that was in 2022, very quickly, DLSS got updates and was better than FSR 2. And then it got worse, right? DLSS 3 was just flat out better than FSR 3.1, just flat out better. And DLSS 3.5 twisted the knife, and 4 kept it going and go. FSR 4 mostly caught up to DLSS 4, but now it's still a bit behind again. And so think about all of this. AMD started their competition with DLSS Journey in 2021. So it's been 5 years, and where are we? Well, after 5 years, AMD is in, like, Digital Foundry puts it in the good enough territory where you probably won't notice the difference most of the time, and it's always worth using. It's better than native, so it's good enough. It's a solid feature, but they're still behind Nvidia. It took them 5 years to still be behind. Well, look at Sony. This came out in 2024. It's been 2 years, and they've caught up to FSR4, or I think the analysis I've seen is that they're almost up to FSR4. Someone who's played Resident Evil 9 extensively already on the PS5 Pro, I can say that it looks pretty. I mean, to me, it looks like it's at least in the same ballpark as DLSS. It really does look very, very good. And so, it took AMD 5 years to almost catch up to DLSS, but still be like kind of a gen behind or half a gen behind. And it took Sony 2 years to catch up to AMD's FSR4 effectively. That's why they're doing this. It's not because they had to, because they can't run FSR4. FSR4 would run on the PS5 Pro. In fact, it would run on the PS5 if they wanted it to, because we know from the leaked, you can already emulate or whatever FSR4 on even RDNA 2, and there's ways to get it working in a worthwhile way. So no, they never needed PSSR. They could have always just ported FSR4 for PS5 and PS5 Pro. They want their own parallel track because they don't want to be beholden to AMD's whims. FSR 1 and 2 kind of kept up with Nvidia and were very impressive, but FSR 3 took way too long to come out and was just completely behind Nvidia. And if you're Sony, you don't want to have to rely on other people. So it's worth the money for them to keep working on a parallel path so that no matter what AMD is doing, they always have something they can hold up in their marketing and something that they believe is as good as they can get it, or they're trying to make it as good as they can get, so that they're not beholden to AMD. And sometimes they will use FSR4 or FSR5 or whatever, but having their own in-house offering gives them insurance that they have something that can compete, even if, again, AMD's out to lunch on something. I'm saying out to lunch a lot. I saw someone saying that. I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell you. It's before dinner, so maybe I'm just hungry. But yeah, so that's why. And those things aren't going to change. Sony's never going to want to be beholden to AMD's software, because sometimes AMD takes forever to get something out. And it is actually pretty good marketing that they can show this, right? And so I think they're going to keep that. I mean, look at this right now with RE9 is like it like like versus the Xbox Series X. It makes the PS5 Pro look like a generation better almost. I mean, it's just crazy. And they're glad that they have that. And they didn't have to wait for AMD to port FSR4, because AMD still has not ported FSR4 to frickin' anything. If anything, that will make, I think, Sony further double down on this strategy of having their own in-house upscaling after seeing how much AMD screwed up porting, officially at least, FSR4 to other products. Um, let's see. Or how next gen ran. Okay, so I think we do have another tip question here, and it's perfect. It goes with two. So I'm going to read them both. So first, we have a tip question from R1NG Master J5, who says, what are your predictions now for next gen RAM and PS6, handheld, and Helix? You said the RAM crisis may get better at the end of next year. I think it might get better at the end of this year. But remember, better does not mean the same as 2025. It just means maybe it'll be like 2023 prices or something, you know. And then Fred Berger writes, and it says, generally speaking, do you see RAM prices coming down at all by the end of next year, or should we expect them to stay about where they are for the foreseeable future? I know it's a common question, but let's be honest, this is the only thing most people are worrying about right now before they even bother to look at next gen tech. They want to know if they can afford the RAM to use it. Right. Good questions, both. But what are my predictions right now for next gen RAM for PS6, handheld, and Helix? So do you mean cost, or do you mean, you know, how much they use? Because I still don't believe they've made that decision. But I can tell you the two most likely options for all of them. For Xbox Magnus, or I guess now maybe we call it Helix, the most likely scenario I believe is they go with 36 or 48 gigabytes of RAM. I think 36 would be enough, and 48 would be more than enough to look like a premium gaming PC. So whatever Microsoft wants to do, again, Microsoft will probably make that decision a year from now when they have to make the decision when they start manufacturing the console. They will wait to see where RAM prices are then. For PlayStation, it's 24 or 30 gig. Oh, no, it's 24 to 36 gigabytes is what they can choose for the handheld. You know, I'm not sure. And then for the PS6 base console, it's 30 or 40 gigabytes. So I believe it's hard for me to believe they're going to go with the maximum amount of RAM anymore, unfortunately. Uh, but you know, if RAM prices go down appreciably, it just depends what happens because there's so much that goes into this decision. It's not just about cost. Everybody remember the PS4, Google it. The PS4 was originally going to be a 4 gigabyte console. And I think it was Randy Pitchford, everyone's favorite person on Twitter right now after Borderlands 4. It was Randy Pitchford that famously told Mark Cerny, if you have 4 gigabytes, Xbox wins. If you have 8 gigabytes, Xbox loses. And he's like, it's that simple. He's like, their device is a lot weaker, but having 8 gigabytes of RAM will make it so your device doesn't seem stronger. And it would be a pity if you made this APU that was so much better designed and then just kneecap the RAM, you know. And so Mark Cerny said, fine, we'll clamshell RAM, we'll get to 8 gigabytes, and the rest is history. We don't know what developers are going to say to AMD. I mean, well, and to Sony yet about what they need. You know, they're probably playing around. I think I forgot what I was told by a developer. Like Sony, I think around now is going to start doing soft pitches to their most trusted studios on what you can expect. So they're doing that right now, and they'll probably have the studios like simulate it. Like you can make a simulated dev kit. Like you could take a, it's not the same thing, but you could take a 9070 XT, clock it to 3 gigahertz to try to simulate being faster or something. Or actually they'd probably take a 9070 and then they would clock that to like, you know, 3 gigahertz. And then, you know, it's weaker than the PS5, I mean PS6, but it's the closest you can get. I believe there were early PS5 dev kits too that have like RDNA 1 in them with the same compute unit count as they're like basically RX 5700s that they had to like liquid cool to hit 2.2 gigahertz like RDNA 2 would. Like they can do that, give it to the dev and say, all right now in this dev kit, so what would they probably put in it? They'd probably put like 32 gigabytes in it right now. And they'll say, how's it going? Like this is what they're going to ask developers early next year. They're probably bringing them the dev kit soon, and they will probably be RX 9070s overclocked with 32 gigs of RAM or something. And they'll just ask them, you know, is this enough? Are you good? Like, and developers will say, yes, it's enough that we have better textures than last gen. You know, we can have more NPCs on screen. We have enough RAM for that. And you know what? We even have this nifty little AI model that it's a tiny weak one, but it uses 4 gigabytes and it's enough for us. And if developers say that, I think Sony will go, okay, 30 gigabytes. That's what they'll do. If developers say, honestly, your console's AI performance is going to blowing us away. Like you're telling us that the real console will be like double this in AI and blah, blah. And like we can only imagine what we could do with that. If you give us only 30 gigabytes, it's not enough. Like I'm just telling you, you're handicapping next gen experiences for this powerful APU you bought from AMD. It really could do so much more. If devs say that to Sony, Then Sony goes, oh, fine, 40 and 36. Like they would do 40 gigabytes for the PS6 and 36 gigabytes for the handheld. It can have 4 less gigabytes of RAM because, it's going to be running at lower resolutions. It'd literally just be the difference in textures and resolutions. It'd be very easy to scale that between them. I think that's a situation where they would do that. But if devs say they have more than enough RAM with like a 32 gigabyte dev kit, I think you see Sony come in and go, okay, well, 30 gigabytes. So the question would be, right now, would it be 30? I don't think it could be 32 for the Canis handheld though. Yeah. In that situation, then they'd probably go with 24 gigabytes for the handheld and 30 for the home console and just say, yeah, I mean, look, use smaller textures when you need to, man, on the handheld. Because 90s, like if it's 24, yeah, your options there are 12, 24, or I think 36. Yeah. So they'd probably go 24 and 30 or 36 and 40. I hope they go with 36 and 40 gigabytes. I hope Microsoft goes with 48 gigabytes, but they haven't made that decision yet. Now, when it comes to cost, I will make one more point here, actually, about the cost of the RAM. Like, I already estimated that the PS6 home console could be 550 without a disk drive like a year ago. And so that means with this drive, it's really like kind of an $80 markup over the base PS5 right now that comes with a disk drive for 550, does it not? I believe, you know. So how could that only cost that much more, like an $80 more? Well, because guys, I don't know what to tell you. Like the motherboard won't cost more. The power supply will actually be cheaper on the PS6. The chassis is going to be cheaper. It uses less energy than the PS5. So they're going to be able to cut costs and corners on quite a few things. And the only thing that increased costs is the RAM and the CPU and the APU, which is the same die size. So you probably add like 50 bucks or more for the CPU. And then unfortunately, if RAM was at 2025 pricing, which is to say record lows, I think the RAM, even if it was like 40 gigabytes, would have probably been only a little more than the RAM in the PS5 back when it launched in 2020 during COVID shortages, where prices were also up, by the way. And in that scenario, that's how you get to like a $550 device where you have to buy your own disk drive. All right, so let's say RAM prices are actually more. Like it's going to cost them another $100 for the RAM. Okay, then it's 650. I do think people have to understand this stuff. That like when we talk about RAM shortages and raising prices, RAM is not the motherboard, RAM is not the plastic housing, RAM is not the power supply. You know, just add a flat 100 to whatever estimate I said, and that's where they could get it. And I think at 650, a lot of people would like it, or I think 600. I still feel like 550 is the price where it's like the PS4 and people lose their minds though. And Sony won't know until we get to next year and we know current pricing. So we'll just have to see. Um, Oh, I got another tipped question here. I see. And that is it for the console question. So this is probably a good time to move on to GPU questions. Let me put down a new timestamp. Ray G17 writes in and says, I'm building a new system and I'm buying one piece at a time. I usually recommend you buy most of it at once, but it was, with the power needed to power modern graphics cards, should I wait to buy a PSU? Uh, I mean, are you gonna buy a 6090? That's the only world where you worry about that. Because guys, I have a 4090 and I have a 750 watt PSU from Corsair. I believe it's a platinum one though, that's super efficient. I think actually they could have claimed it's an 800 watt to be fair, but technically they market it as a 750 watt. Um, I've been using that since, gosh, has it really been that long? Oh my lord, I think it might have been. I think I've been using this thing since like 2019 or at least 2022 or 21. I don't remember exactly which, if this is the original one to my desktop, but I just want to put that in perspective. I have a 750 watt PSU running a 5090 and it's like pretty goddamn old. Now it's a very high quality unit. All right. I did not cheap out. But I think people often get way too powerful power supplies. Now, if you're going to get a 5090, yeah, you're gonna want at least a 1000 watt. I mean, you just are. But the 4090, even when I overclocked it and pushed it over 500 watts, nothing, no tripping, anything, no issues with this thing. I also, to be fair, I have a 100 watt 7945 HX3D. So that's a motherboard with a built-in Zen 4 16 core with Vcache. So it's, a bit more efficient than using the desktop version. Like for 5% less performance, it consumes like half the power. I think that's worth the trade-off personally, especially since it was a lot cheaper. But even then, I just think you don't really need more than like no one does Crossfire or SLI anymore. I don't think you really need more than a 750 watt. Aren't PSUs cheap right now, or have those also gone up in price? Let me see. Corsair 750 watt PSU. Actually, this will be fun. If I go to my Amazon here, which I'm not going to show on screen because I do not want to dox myself, but I believe I got that from Amazon, didn't I? Corsair. Search my order history. Don't know why those. There it is. Yep, Corsair SF series. It was bought in 2019. I'm using the same 750 watt. Now, wow, for 7 years, no issues running a 5090. Again, it is a high quality model, though. What did I pay for that back then? This is becoming actually pretty funny to me. See if I can pull up the invoice. Back when I lived in Peoria, Illinois. Yeah, so that was $192 after tax, although there was no sales tax back then on online stuff because I guess online stuff just didn't count to lawmakers back then. But what? Is that really how cheap this is now? See, this is what I'm talking about. People complain about prices. What is it 80 plus what? Platinum, it is. Yeah, basically the modern iteration of this from Corsair is $90. I mean, look, will power supplies get cheaper? I don't know. I think you're safe to buy this now. And I want to, guys, God, this is going to be a timestamp here in perspective. To the people that say pricing has never been worse, the power supply is like 2.5 times cheaper. Same thing than it was 7 years ago. Let me look up RAM. I think I can look up an old Corsair RAM kit too. Yeah, Vengeance kit, 16 gigabytes. This is from March of 2020. Oh, this is 32 gigabytes, March of 2022. All right. Now, before I sound stupid, let me just double check something over here because this is very important because this all ties back into what the consoles will cost. By the way, no, I don't want Newegg special financing. God, freaking Google ads. Corsair 32 gigabyte DDR5. What do we have here? Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, like RAM is more than when I got it in 20. Well, but what if I add them together, So I paid $174 for 32 gigs of DDR4 just 4 years ago, people. I think almost exact. Was it exactly like 3.5 years ago? All right. So 32 gigabytes of DDR5 right now. Yeah, you're going to spend about double that. Okay. Maybe a little more than that. Or let me actually sort for cheapest. Sometimes they just show you the most. Let me remove Corsair actually, because that's probably stupid during a shortage to insist on one vendor. Oh, yeah. Okay. So no. They got Kingston. Kingston's great too, and it's DDR5 6000, so it's not the slowest stuff. So, okay, but it's a 16 gigabyte kit. You gotta be careful. Oh yeah, so it's about double though. There are some, yeah, there's some here for like 350 if you look. Okay, so guys, RAM is twice as expensive as when I got it in 2022, but the PSU is also hundreds of dollars left. So let's add that plus like 360. All right, and then let's do 174 plus 190. Good lord. So yeah, it's more if you add the PSU and that together. But then if you add the monitor, my monitor was like $800 and worse than a $600 OLED monitor. Now, really worse than even like a $400 one because I'd rather have 1440p OLED than 4K non OLED, at the same price. So when you put all things together, not everything is as expensive as you think, and you really do need to go back in time. And don't get me started. That's DDR5. That's DDR5 at almost double the speed of the DDR4 I got 4 years ago. If we look at slower DDR5 than that, or DDR4, or what DDR5 cost in 2022. It was a lot. It was a lot. So put that in perspective when it comes to these next gen consoles. Yes, RAM will be more expensive next year, probably, than what it was in 2025, but that was rock bottom. Sony might just be paying like 2022 RAM prices, and that didn't stop them from launching the PS5 for $499. So again, let's just put that in perspective. But yeah, I don't know if you'd buy one part at a time. I would just finish your build, right? Like, what's is a 90 or 9070 XT is still reasonable? I think they are, right? Yeah, 750. I would just finish your build now with that 750 watt PSU and a 9070 XT, unless you think you're going to be getting a 5090 at some point. But I don't recommend getting things that, I'm sorry, it's just too much power. 4090 is the highest I can recommend, but and it's because it really doesn't even use 450 watts. It usually uses like 300. Um, Waldo 16 writes in. Well, before I get to this, let me get through some of these GPU questions from the patrons before we shift topics to the Steam machine. So, TechnoLads writes in and says, any thoughts on the RTX 5050 9GB and 5070 laptop 12GB? If Nvidia does a full refresh top to bottom of 3GB modules, would you suggest that gives more credence to the fact that next gen could be delayed to 2028 for next gen being the 6090? And my answer, TechnoLads, is yes. And you probably already saw that if you watched the earlier part of this live stream. But yes, my answer is if they refresh the 5070 on laptop to 12GB, if a 5090 9GB comes, and then a 5060 12GB, and then a 5060 or 5070 Ti Super 18GB, or 5070 Super 18GB, 5070 Ti Super 24GB. If all of these things start to roll out late this year or early next year, yeah, I do. I do think that suggests Nvidia is launching these refreshes, what is it? Like a year and a half after the generation started, because the generation is going to be 3 years. I do. I do think that would suggest that. Doesn't confirm it. That's not me confirming that, but my answer is yes, that would suggest it at least. HMS writes in and says, "Hi, Tom. I'm going to counter all the worst year for laptops ever discourse I've seen with a hot take. I now have an RTX 5050 laptop with a 1440p screen, and in my testing on Hogwarts Legacy and Space Marine 2, I was averaging 60 frames per second in 1440p medium, and then used DLSS balanced, not even performance mode, and it looked so good on that little screen. If you told me a 50 class GPU could do that even 3 years ago, I would have thought you were on drugs." Yeah, I mean, look, laptops are much more interesting this year than desktop because you can still get some laptops for reasonable prices. Strix Halo's dropped in price. Panther Lake's pretty expensive, but let's be honest, a Panther Lake system for like $1,800 now is a lot cooler than a Lunar Lake system was for $1,500 last year. So yeah, I mean, look, I think laptops are still pretty interesting this year. But if you need one, I would get it now because you never know if that could change. Jeffrey Ray's writes in, is anyone upset that Nvidia is releasing products not on the latest TSMC node and that it is becoming the norm? The 50 series was released on 5 nanometer class N4P when 3 nanometer was in full production. And now with Vera, what the 60 series is going to be based on is reportedly coming out with a 3 nanometer process when 2 will be in full swing by then. It's also true of the consoles. The consoles will be 3 nanometer when 2 nanometers out there instead of when the PS5 and Series X were on 7 nanometer right next to 7 nanometer launches. He says, is anyone else upset about this besides me? Look, man, I'm going to tell you why that's happening. AI. I'm sorry. Like, the reason Nvidia has paused production of the 50 series effectively is not actually because of RAM, from what I've heard. By the way, to those going, why would they refresh with more RAM? My sources tell me that RAM was a bottleneck at some point for 50 series. It is just TSMC capacity right now, that is, because of how many AI contracts they got on 3 nanometer. Well, next year, you'll have a lot of people moving to 2 nanometer. Zen 6 will use 2 nanometer for at least some of its cores. Nova Lake will use 2 nanometer. I would guess NVIDIA will be preparing some 2 nanometer thing by 2028. Yeah, they're going to launch 3 nanometer because they don't want to compete with 2 nanometer capacity. It is what it is, and that's just going to happen for the foreseeable future. Will that continue to happen the following gen? I don't know. But what I will say is this. 2 nanometer is so expensive. So that's also why they're going to 3 nanometer. And remember, AMD, I've heard from some of my contacts, I think other people have said this as well, that they might use N3C. So that's the cheap version of 3 nanometer. There's no N2C for a very long time, I don't think. So N3C, a cost-effective version of 3 nanometer, I mean, those wafers might cost half as much as N2P. So that would be also why they're doing it. And so be careful what you wish for. Do I wish Nvidia was going to launch like a 6060 on 2 nanometer that used a fourth the power of the current 5060? I do, but if the laptop was $3,000, I don't think anyone would want it anyways. Chris Rich writes in and says the first consumer dedicated GPUs on TSMC 7 nanometer came out less than half a year after the first iPhone on TSMC 7 nanometer. For 5 nanometer, the gap though was 2 years, and for 3 nanometer, it looks likely to be 3 years. But this isn't happening for consumer CPUs. Can you think of any reason for this other than the wafers are just too darn expensive for a big? Well, the CPUs are smaller. Come on, guys. Xbox Magnus is 408 millimeters squared. Meanwhile, the yeah, meanwhile, like just using Zen 7 actually, which will use TSMC A14, the 8-core module, like let me pull that up again because I think like this is really instructive. So let me go. Where do I want? Here we go. So let's go to my folder from High Yield because I know I had a picture in there of that. So yeah, I mean, look, let me share my screen. Here we go. This is why. This is the part that uses the most expensive node with Silver King for Zen 7. Compare how that looks, you know, versus how Xbox Magnus looks. Because this is just 56, I believe, millimeters squared of A14. And then right here, they can use 155 millimeters squared of even 6 nanometer. I've heard there's a 6 nanometer IO die for Zen 7 potentially, in addition to the more advanced ones. That's why, because you might as well. These things cost like $50 or something. If they go to costing $80 on the new, or $100 even on the newest node, and then in doing so you double performance or something, they're gonna do that, you know. As with a graphics card where you have Nvidia going to like 600 millimeters squared or more, that's a lot more. The cost of that thing is not fat, but actually the silicon. So also, let's point this out too. 2 nanometer, I believe, has a reticle limit of 400 millimeters squared. So that means you can make a 80 class on there, but you can't make a 90 class unless you stitch dies together. So Nvidia and AMD going with 3 nanometer for their dedicated GPUs next gen buys them time to figure out what they're going to do about the reticle limit. Like, are they just going to make smaller graphics cards once they're past 2 nanometer? I don't know. Or are they going to do die stitching like what Nvidia is doing with their giant AI chips? Probably for some gaming things, but you know how expensive that's going to be? Like, they can just use 3 nanometer and have a massive die. But if they go to 2, not only is the wafer substantially more expensive, like maybe 50% more money, but then to get a die the same size as 3 nanometer, you now need to die stitch it. That's that's going to make that thing cost twice as much, not 50% more, probably twice as much. And is the node twice as good? No. Not for GPU usage, at least. No. So that's why they would stay on 3 nanometer, at least for one generation. It's not just capacity, it's that reticle limit as well, where I mean, look what Nvidia did with Turing. They used 12 nanometer and it competed with AMD's 7 nanometer RDNA 1. Why? That's just a bigger die. Like, they can do that. And I think they think that's the more cost-effective route for graphics cards next generation, but just not for CPU. So it isn't all about greediness. It actually isn't. Um, all right. AI Soldier 789 writes in and says FSR 4.1 got leaked before the official release. With Nvidia, that never happens. Same thing with the FP8 version of FSR 4. Do you think that some AMD employees are friends with the modder community and deliberately releasing these versions to them? Has it more to do with the open source approach, or is it deliberately leaking to test the water? Well, not even necessarily to test the waters. I mean, maybe they just like the community and someone at AMD wants to help them. I don't think I would rule that out. I'm not going to, spend a lot of time on this question, like why is FSR stuff leaking before it's public? But I will say that, yeah, it's totally plausible. There's employees that are just mad at the direction of management on FSR. That really does happen. I mean, I've gotten some leaks because people just didn't agree with management, and it wasn't in an attempt to change anything. They just wanted me to know the truth. Like, maybe that is what's going on there. All right. Let me add another timestamp here. Again, if you're going to submit any questions, now is the time to do it, as I will be done probably pretty soon. I'm already starting to run on fumes. So, Waldo16 writes in and says, would the Steam Machine live a long life in the market? Would it? I don't know. It depends how good it is. But here's what I will say. Assuming they are updating it to be easy to upgrade the RAM capacity and the SSD, and assuming they do have some ray tracing optimizations and they port FSR 4 and maybe keep porting, right? Maybe they keep porting to FSR 5 to RDNA 3 for the Steam Machine, because that's what they basically confirmed in their press release recently. I mean, I think it could be a pretty compelling product. I think they could launch that thing at $500 to $600, depending on what they get with RAM. And once they do that, they're offering something similar to a base PS5 once you factor in that it might get FSR 4 while doing all these other things. It's basically it's Xbox Helix S, and Xbox Helix will be Xbox Helix X, except that you don't need to deal with Windows. So how long of a life? I don't know. And no, it's not going to sell as well as Xbox or come close to PlayStation. But you never know. Like, if they get enough of these out there at the right price and it does manage to perform around a PS5, I think they could keep selling that thing at first for 600, then when RAM prices go down 400, and pump those suckers out, and there would be a compelling community that uses them. But I don't see it being like an 8-year generation console thing. I think it's an opportunistic, they played like I keep saying, they did like junkyard wars. They went to AMD, said, what do you have left over that you want to get rid of, that we can get for a cheap price? And they took those like tablet CPU it's using in the old 6 nanometer low end GPU. They're putting them together, optimizing them. And it's just an opportunistic console that will, if I were to guess, last 4 to 5 years. I don't think it's going to last much longer than that, though, before they would want to launch a new one if it was successful. That's my guess, though. But, we'll see. Put that down there. Steam Machine life. All righty. Any other questions? Oh, yeah, we got a few. Oh, we got quite a few more tipped questions here, it actually seems. So, Bespoke EP tips and says, do you think this random Xbox announcement signals that they're trying to rush this launch to the first half of 27? Huh. When did they tease Xbox teases next gen? And then obviously I need to filter the results. Custom range. So, like, did they do this in 2019? 8K 120. Who said that? Yeah, no. My dude. I'll put a link. I'll drop the link here right now. They teased Project Scarlet June 2019. So no, I mean, look, it's March instead of June, but I think they teased it now just to get people excited it's different than PlayStation. Everyone knows there will be a PS6 and a PS7 and a PS8, 9, 10. No one knows what's going on with Xbox because their sales have collapsed and like a house of cards. So Xbox kind of needs to put out teasers earlier than Sony so people know anything's coming. So no, I think you have to remember Xbox teased Project Scarlet a year and a half before it launched. Now they're just doing it like a year and 3/4 at most. Really, probably still a year and a half before Magnus launches. And they're doing it maybe a slightly extra early just to make sure people don't think there's not a next gen, because there's been so many negative rumors around Xbox. So no, I think if anything, this is in line with the previous gen launching a year and a half later. And let me say too that, again, people, remember, let me share my screen for this. I have this handy, so I might as well just put it on screen. This. I literally have this from AMD, right? Like I literally have Wave 1. Where is that? Where is this right here is AT2, the chiplet that will be used in the 9070 XT successor and Xbox Magnus. Look, Wave 1, April 2027. That's when they'll start manufacturing it. That's pretty much exactly when Sony's going to manufacture the PS6, by the way, based on what I've seen. This points to a late 2027 launch, and certainly not before the middle of 2027. Thank you for the question, though. Danny Mallorca says, greetings from Spain. Thank you for the tip, my European friend. Illustrious One writes in and says, will physical next-gen games be like PS1 multi-CD? I mean, that's kind of an interesting question, right? What's the highest? Blu-rays go up to like 100. Let's see. I don't think there's really going to be an issue here. Technically, they go up to 128 gigabytes, guys. So no, I think they're fine. Right? And I know there's people that go, oh, Call of Duty's blah, blah, blah. Guys, most games are below 60 gigabytes or at least below 75. That fits on a Blu-ray. So, and any game that doesn't could just download the remaining 10 gigabytes. And I guess if you lived in a rural area, that's still saving you maybe a day or two of downloading. Right? So I think Blu-ray is going to cut it. It cuts it. Like you can go up to 128 gigabytes. Most devs will ship with 50 or 100 gigabyte discs. And again, for every game that's 100 gigabytes, I'll show you a game that's 30. Like the average is like kind of 60 or 50 for AAA, but not all games are even that big, really. Plenty of indie and AA games are smaller than that. Like wasn't Spider-Man Miles Morales like 40 gigabytes or something? That's AAA. So no, I don't think they need to go multis. And again, will there be like one game that is? Sure. But there already has been with Blu-ray already. There's already Blu-ray disc games that require multiple CDs, but it's very rare. So I guess if your comparison to the PS1 is that what will be as rare as with the PS1, where it's like just Final Fantasy VII and a few others, sure. But most games, overwhelming majority of games can probably get by with 50, almost all with 100 or 128 gigabyte disc. And if there's a game that needs a disc for the like online to make up for it or something, we've already seen Blu-ray based games that need multiple discs. It's rare, but it does happen. So I would expect things to be mostly like how they are now, personally. So I don't see any other tipped questions. Put out a request. If you're watching if you're a patron and you're in the Moore's Law is Dead Discord, you can in the after video chat thread right now ask me a last minute question if you want. And otherwise, I will read through the rest of the pre-submitted questions and wait for any other tipped ones. Here's one. R1NG Master J5 writes and says, last question. Don't worry about it. I appreciate the questions, especially when you're tipping. Don't feel bad that you've asked a bunch. This is why I do this job, because I like it. But anyways, he says, last question. What are the chances of an operating system RAM chip on the PS6 going with the dedicated OS cores? So I think what you're saying is, what are the chances they have a separate allotment of RAM to run with those low power cores? I don't think that's likely. I think if they thought they needed a lot of RAM for the operating system, they would just go with 40 gigabytes of RAM in the console, because that would be cheaper probably than having a separate IO controller. Because remember, because I believe the PS 4 had like what, 256 megabytes or half a gigabyte or something of DDR2, right? That ran with the background CPU core, ARM core that handled recording or something. But once they got to the PS5, though, Zen 2 was just so powerful, they said, screw it. Well, we don't need the background cores. So I haven't seen anything that suggests backup RAM, and I have diagrams of how like the handheld is laid out, by the way. So I have nothing that suggests they're going to have other RAM besides what they have for system RAM, and I or for like the GDDR7 or LPDDR5X. And I would just assume, that if they needed more, they'll go with 40 and 36 gigabytes for the home and handheld versions. Long before, because like let's think about it, like going from 30 to 40 gigabytes for them is probably going to be like adding $100 to the cost. Do you do that, or do you add a memory controller to the die, and then get like $40 of RAM anyways? Is that really worth it? I don't know. I haven't seen any suggestion of that. All right. Kachafuki writes in and says, "Is Apple's new Fusion architecture related to the Silicon Bridge AMD is using on their next round of chips? Isn't it more like die stitching or something? Apple new Fusion chip. Or actually, I don't know. Actually, I think I saw a Marcus Brownlee thumbnail about this Fusion chip. I know nothing about it. Apple debuts Fusion architecture. Let me see. World's most advanced chips for pro laptops. Two dies into a single system on a chip, which includes a powerful CPU, scalable GPU, media engine, unified memory controller, blah, blah, blah. Do we have a picture of what it looks like? Duh. I think they're still just basically doing something that's like die stitching or kind of how like Strix Halo works, right? So that's what I'm seeing right here. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing right here. I think it's a different system, unless someone can correct me in one of the chats, but that's what I'm seeing. Another Chris writes in and says, I wanted to point out something that you talked about with high yield. The software industry has been trying to get reusable code for decades. It takes a lot of work. And I think what people need to know is that eventually things get depreciated, right? Like ecosystems change and you eventually have to have ground up designs to meet new needs. The interconnects are always changing, and eventually you have a monster that is too big to maintain. So, do you see parallels with this to the hardware industry in terms of their chiplet design? Um, People need to know it gets depreciated. Uh, no, not really. I don't know. That would be a better question probably for when I'm not as tired and I have a different guest on or high yield on again. But not really. I think they're just using whatever system or chiplet system they think is the most efficient for the time using the latest tech. It's been trying to get reusable code for a decade. And when it comes to like reusable code, I just don't, yeah, I don't think that's really the same thing. It's an interesting parallel you're trying to make, but um, all right, let's see here. Any final questions? Let me see. Do you think Rockstar with the two delays changed their mind and will release the PC version day one with consoles? No. Sorry, I just don't think Rockstar likes to milk their games twice. Sorry, I'm just being honest. High on Life 2 and Indiana Jones, and you can get a Half-Life 3. I wish we could use the next Xbox as a PC. To some degree, I believe you're going to be able to. Again, subscribe to the Moore's Law's Dead Patreon. We have an over 1 hour podcast coming on with a guest who's read up on all of the things going on at Microsoft, where we go over what Xbox will probably be. Um, duh, duh. All right. I think that's going to do it. I am falling asleep here, everybody. It's been a long week and I stayed up too late last night. So please remember, like the video, comment down below, share, and make sure you're subscribed to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel. I think YouTube just purged a bunch of people for some reason. Double check that you weren't unsubscribed from the channel, please, before you sign off. And again, like and join the Patreon as well. New Die Shrink coming out tomorrow. I have several guests lined up. I know Sacred Symbols, Colin Moriarty will be at least be some guests in the next few months. But I've got a lot of other people I'm talking to as well. You can ask them questions. There's a Discord on there. Hundreds of die shrinks you probably haven't heard yet. So please consider joining on the Patreon. And otherwise, again, everybody, thank you for watching and listening, and have an excellent weekend, everyone.